I'm going to help you change your life one thought at a time. My name is Michelle Raza, and I created Finding Yourself SATX Life Coaching in 2017 to help people like you find their best life. Today we're going to cover Dr. Gibson's Self-Care for Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. We left off on Chapter 10, which is called Debugging Your Mind. So if you followed along on our previous videos, we've gone through the past 9 chapters step by step by step. Each time we read a little bit, we just read the chapter, and cool thing is Dr. Gibson did give us permission to cover this work, so super excited about that. And then of course I always have to add a little bit of my own flavor to it. So thanks for hanging out with me today. Without further ado, I will go ahead and dive in. If you haven't had a chance, please do check out our website. We're at www.findingyourselfsatxlifecoaching.com. Thanks. Okay, Chapter 10, Debug Your Mind. Any thought that makes you feel bad or hopeless is probably some form of malware. Calling the brain a computer is a popular metaphor for this miraculous organ. And like a computer, your brain is highly vulnerable to invasive programs that are bad for its operating system. In the computer world, these destructive programs are collectively known as malware, but individually might be called viruses, bugs, Trojan horses, or worms. Some of them are drive-by downloads that can cause zombie computers. Whether the goal is a complete takeover of your computer or just messing with some files, these malicious codes are installed by programmers who have gained remote and unauthorized access. If you are a computer novice, you might not notice the presence of a bug until your computer starts acting up. If you took it to a specialist, though, they would detect the virus and start debugging your system. When it comes to mental viruses, you can do the same. You just have to know how. Mental malware can get into our brains at any age, as long as the programmer is charismatic or powerful enough. But most influential malware starts in childhood, when we are socialized to believe all kinds of things that make life easier for the adults in our lives, especially EI parents. Because these socialization viruses often are based on expediency and not on any real logic, they can be a confusing hodgepodge of contradictory messages. When these contradictory rules kick in simultaneously, we are paralyzed between two unequally insistent thoughts. We are paralyzed between two equally insistent thoughts. The first step in debugging your mental computer is to realize that this bug was probably installed before you were old enough to know the difference. Undoubtedly, you were given the message that it was for your own good, but as a rule of thumb, any thought that makes you feel bad or hopeless is probably some form of malware. Legitimate guilt and remorse tend to be fast-acting prompts that move us to corrective action. When we have actually done something wrong, we feel a strong, healthy urge to remedy it. On the other hand, mental malware just makes you feel like a failed person. Early childhood malware likes to tell us that certain thoughts and feelings are bad. It makes us feel ashamed of our true reactions and confused about our motives. And of course, the malware will never disclose its control tactics. Instead, you will be run by an invisible download installed in childhood that pretends to be your conscience. It makes you waste copious amounts of time and mental energy trying to get yourself to think the right way and feeling bad when you fail. You become the perfect host for a virus that says you can never be good enough. A good way to catch these viruses is to write down any thoughts that give you a bad feeling about yourself. As you record them over a day, you will get a good idea of how far this computer worm has spread in your thinking. Remember, brain malware is characterized by contradictory messages, mutually exclusive values, and absolute commandments that are full of exceptions. You can't succeed if you use mental malware to think with. After you spot the virus's effect, the next step is to identify its source code. That would be the one-sentence draconian rule that your guilt or low self-esteem is based on. It might be that people must always love their families, or that parents are always strong and right. It might tell you something like self-interest is bad, but success is good. Just try to make that combination work. You will see that these sweeping statements do not hold water or even make sense. Next, your job is to expose the virus's code, deprogram it, and send the Trojan horse packing. You do this by contemplating each thought that makes you feel bad until you can spot its illogic and where it likely came from. Question it, disagree with it, and argue against it like a lawyer's cross-examination. Little by little, you can loosen the hold it has on you. Once you realize you have been unwittingly programmed, you can coolly observe its noxious effect and say an inner no every time it starts to make you feel bad. To reprogram yourself, you then choose empowering adult beliefs that make sense in the grown-up world. It helps to make a 2-column list, writing down your old and new beliefs across from each other. You will see that you can't follow both because they can't both be true. Then, when you're ready to give it up, literally cross out the previous virus-infected belief. Your EI parent did not know their pass-along virus was going to cause you so much trouble. And to let it linger in your brain is the worst kind of self-sabotage. A Trojan horse can look like a gift from the gods, but that sinking feeling will tell you that it's time to close the city gates. Okay, so this one's not nearly as heavy as the previous one was. The previous one was talking about healing from emotional injuries and how you kind of just have to accept them in order to grow around them. I imagine that if you are a computer programmer, this whole chapter probably felt like nails on a chalkboard because the stories that she was talking about weren't necessarily on par with the language. I mean, she's a psychologist, not a computer programmer. But the point is to examine your thoughts, right? And to take an analytical approach to your own thoughts and be able to see what or where those thoughts are coming from. In the study of behavior, so Dr. Judd Brewer, he wrote a lot about addiction, and he also has an app called Unwinding Anxiety. And I don't get compensated by Dr. Gibson or Dr. Brewer or any of the authors that I cover. It's just something that I like talking about and I find value in. But Dr. Brewer says in order to rewire your brain to do things a little differently, you have to stop and say, what do I get from this? So in a lot of cases, you can see that you're doing an activity that you don't necessarily like. So you're like, I don't like how I'm drinking sodas. I'm going to stop drinking sodas. And so he calls that going from step 1, identifying the issue, to step 3, trying to correct the behavior. And what he really tries to get you to focus on is a middle step or he calls them gears. Gear 2, where essentially you do the behavior that you don't like and you focus on it and you really immerse yourself in it in a mindful way. And then you ask yourself, what do I get from this? So depending on what happened to you in your childhood and where you came from, right, you may have learned early on that anytime that you're happy, like you can't fully smile or be happy because maybe you would get in trouble for that. And so maybe you want to stop and journal, like she's recommending, write down instances where this is happening to you and take an analytical mind to it and say, what is the consequence? So if I smile really big today and I'm super happy, like what's going to happen? Is my dad going to yell at me? Like my dad doesn't live with me anymore. So if I'm super happy today, what do I get from this? Maybe as I'm walking down the street, another person will see me and I have an infectious smile and then they'll smile back. So what is the outcome of this behavior? That at a young age, I learned to repress because I lived in a household where dad was always stressed and I couldn't laugh or be happy about the show that I was watching. But now, what do I get from this? What outcome do I get from this behavior? And that's just an example, but you can do that for a lot of different behaviors. Like maybe you feel shame around something that you don't necessarily need to feel shame around anymore. And so it's one thing to just tell yourself in your mind, oh, well, I have nothing to be ashamed about, so I shouldn't be ashamed. That's not going to change how you feel. So really just taking the time to experience that uncomfortableness and maybe journal about it and then look at it. And that's the reason why you have a coach or a trusted friend or a mentor or a therapist, because then they can look at it more objectively. But if you journal, then you can write it down, and then later you can look at it a little more objectively when you're not in the middle of it, to try and analyze what is causing these thoughts and feelings that aren't the greatest for me. So that's kind of what she's telling us in this chapter is, how do you figure out those things, or how do you identify those things that are causing you to feel bad, and not that they shouldn't necessarily do that, and where did it come from? And it could be that you're ashamed of something that you should be ashamed about, and in that case you should go and try to make it right. And if the person is passed on, or if it would hurt them to make it right, then maybe you write a letter to them and then you burn it, right? Because you don't want to make things worse by trying to make it right. But at the same time, just in your own mind, you can help yourself overcome those feelings by making amends in some way. But what she's referring to, when you're the child of an emotionally immature parent, maybe it was convenient for them to tell you certain things or to act a certain way, and they didn't really ever take your thoughts, feelings, dreams, or considerations into their mind at all, right? And so that's what you would need to reprogram in your brain if you're the child of an emotionally immature parent. So thanks for hanging out with me today. I hope that if you are still watching at this point, that you've subscribed to our channel, like and subscribe. Also, we have weekly workshops that you can attend. Those cap out at 10 people. We have live coaching sessions, so from 30 minutes up to an hour. And then our digital coaching package starts at 99 cents and goes up to under 10 bucks. So if you're interested in changing your life one thought at a time, check out my website, www.findingyourselfsatxlifecoaching.com. Take care, y'all. Talk to you soon.